few more people coming in. I think we have a seat way over there still. All right. Well, I want to welcome everyone to tonight's program. My name is Candace Summers. I'm the Senior Director of Education at the McLean County Museum of History. And thank you. And we are thrilled to have all of you here tonight for a joint session of the History Reads Book Club and the Lock Your Doors True Crime Book Club, both of which are quarterly book clubs and free to join and open to the public right here at Bloomington Public Library. The book we have selected this month for this joint session was Reasonable Doubt, which investigates the brutal murder of 4 members of the Hendricks family in 1983. I don't believe I needed to say that because so many people in this room lived through this salient moment of local history. Tonight, though, we are fortunate to have the author of that book, Steve Vogel, with us. And he is going to share what he experienced as a journalist, reporting on it and living through that. Steve is a veteran print and broadcast journalist, columnist, and talk show host who covered every minute of the original trial described in Reasonable Doubt. With a bachelor's from Illinois Wesleyan University and a master's degree from Northwestern, his career has spanned print and broadcast news, radio programming, corporate communications, and newspaper column writing.
That's enough.
That's enough? I can do that. I will plug his forthcoming book, Broadcast Live, 71 True Stories, including some I just as soon forget, which will be out next month. And it will highlight several stories related to the Hendricks murders, which we'll be discussing tonight. I want to remind everyone that this program is being live streamed and recorded, so if you don't want it to live on the internet forever, mind your P's and Q's, folks. And when we do the question and answer session at the end, you're going to see me zipping through this big audience, this standing room crowd only, with a microphone. So please wait till I can make it to you before asking your question. That way our folks at home can hear the questions along with Steve's responses. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Vogel.
Thank you. I appreciate you all being here this evening. I want to thank the book clubs for inviting me here this evening, and thanks to the Bloomington Public Library for allowing me to be part of this. Actually, it's a 1-year celebration of moving into this new, beautifully expanded facility, and our family has a bit of connection to that because our son-in-law, Alex Cardona, was the president of the library board 10 years ago when this project really got moving. So it's great to see you all here tonight. And thanks to the museum for being the co-sponsor of this as well. Can we adjust the volume on this a little bit because I'm getting like this?
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me okay this way too? Okay, good. To the museum as well, and I hope many of you got to see the program that the Peoria PBS affiliate did not too long ago about the early days of McLean County history, because Candace, in fact, was interviewed in that program, and it focused first on the all right, it's not advancing, right?
It's not advance the slide because it's not going forward.
There we go. All right. It began by talking about Evergreen Cemetery, which of course is almost within walking distance where we are this evening, and called it a walk through there unearths the historical bones of McLean County, and it really is true. Of course, you've got the Stevenson graves there. You have David Davis, and you have House Wetborn. And then not far from those graves is the marker that we're here to discuss this evening. The crime we're going to discuss this evening. Tragic part of McLean County history. And that tombstone, of course, is quite a bit newer, but still about 42 years old. And I know I see head shaking already here, saying, oh my, has it really been 42 years since then? Because I remember it like yesterday. In fact, let's do a little base setting here. How many people here tonight lived around here when that crime occurred? Look at that. Well, 7/8 of you here. How many of you read Reasonable Doubt? Good showing, thank you. So we're just gonna skim the surface of the facts of the case, a quick summary. It was an election night, November 8th, 1983. The bodies of a young mother, Susan Hendricks, and her 3 children, Rebecca, Grace, and Benjamin, were found in their beds in a fairly new home on Bloomington's east side. They'd been brutally murdered. The apparent murder weapons, an axe, and a butcher knife were left on the beds. It was an awful crime scene. A month later, the father and husband, David Hendricks, who was 29 years old at the time, was charged with the crimes. After a 9-week-long trial that presented a completely circumstantial case, Hendricks was convicted of killing his wife and 3 children. He was sentenced to natural life in prison. The convictions were upheld first by a state appeals court and then by the Illinois Supreme Court. And then about a year after that, the state Supreme Court agreed to reconsider the case. And eventually, by a unanimous 6-0 vote, it overturned the conviction and the life sentence, giving prosecutors the choice of setting Hendricks free or putting him on trial for a second time. Prosecutors chose to retry him. And in 1991, a jury found Hendricks not guilty. Hendricks was a free man after spending about 8 years behind bars for a crime he says he did not commit. That, in summary, is the story. By the way, I want to thank my son Eric for helping me with these PowerPoint situation. I'm a techno idiot, and I'd never be able to make this happen without him. And as Candace noted, this program is also being live streamed. So contemplate this. I made sure that David Hendricks knows that it is being live streamed. So he conceivably could be watching it tonight. Let's dig a little deeper into the story. Hendricks had married young. He was 19 when he got married. His wife was 20. This photo was taken when they were in England celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary, just a few months before the murders occurred.
Yeah, that's the thing that John told me.
Their 3 children were 7-year-old Grace at the top, 5-year-old Benjamin, and 9-year-old Rebecca, who would be celebrating her 51st birthday next month if she were alive. David and Susan, all 4 of their parents, and most of their many brothers and sisters were members of a very conservative, almost primitive Christian religious group known to outsiders as the Plymouth Brethren. They had no ordained clergy, no churches, no specific organization. They were very family-oriented, a very inward-looking group. So it was a member of the Brethren who presided over the funeral for the 4 murder victims at Evergreen Cemetery. Hendricks had become a very successful person financially with the invention of a back brace. Prosecutors believed that he had become bored with his marriage and wanted out. But divorce was forbidden by the Brethren, except in the case of adultery.
You might be too close to it, because I'm like,
Police discovered Hendricks had made some rather awkward sexual advances on some young women he had hired to model his back brace at trade shows and for sales brochures. So essentially they believed the only way Hendricks could pursue a different life the only way out of his marriage in a fashion that would maintain his reputation within his family and his religious group was to kill his wife, and in order to shift suspicion away from himself, to also murder his 3 children. The evidence against Hendricks was all circumstantial. There were no usable fingerprints or footprints at a very bloody crime scene. A major part of the prosecution case was built on expert opinions concerning when the murders occurred. Opinions that were based almost entirely on the contents of the victim's stomachs. Hendricks had left for a business trip late the night of the murders. Prosecution experts testified scientific evidence indicated the murders occurred before Hendricks departed on his trip. Defense experts testified that the time of death was at best uncertain, and that the killings could easily have occurred sometime after Hendricks left the house. The first jury vote was evenly divided 6-6. But the jurors eventually, 5.5 hours later, arrived at a unanimous verdict of guilty. The state sought the death penalty. The judge instead sentenced Hendricks to natural life in prison with no chance of parole. Hendricks was sent to the Menard Correctional Center south of St. Louis. This is a photo of him at a press conference he held inside the prison in 1986, just after the state appeals court upheld his conviction on a vote of 3-0. And that's a young me there on the right, sitting in the front row of the press conference. Given the unanimous appeals court decision, some people were surprised when the next year the state Supreme Court even agreed to hear the case. But it did. And it took that court 21 months to arrive at a decision on a vote of 4-2 to uphold the verdict. Then, 9 months after that, the same court, the state's highest court, in a move that may have been unprecedented, decided to rehear the case. That rehearing took place almost exactly 6 years after the murders. And in the summer of 1990, the court overturned the verdict and sentence and ordered the state to either retry Hendricks or to set him free. The state decided to retry him. A 7-week trial occurred a couple blocks from here over at the Law and Justice Center before a jury that was imported from Decatur. It deliberated 10 hours and pronounced Hendricks not guilty. An hour later, on March 29th of 1991, Hendricks walked out of the McLean County Law and Justice Center, a free man. The same judge had presided over both trials. Judge Richard Boehner had caused quite a stir with something he said as he sentenced Hendricks to natural life following the first trial. As I said, the state had sought the death penalty. But in his prepared sentencing order, Judge Boehner essentially said that as far as he was concerned, the prosecution's case against Hendricks had not been strong enough, had not reached a level of reasonable doubt that allowed him as a judge to ethically impose a death sentence. 1 week after the second trial, Judge Boehner appeared on my radio talk show. For more than 100 minutes, he took questions from me and from the audience, from the listeners. And here's a clip from that, if I can play it.
Yeah.
No?
Judge, I was under the impression that if a jury came to a decision such as in the first trial, when they convicted David, and if the judge disagreed with that decision, that in extreme cases that the judge could overrule the jury. Now, if that is so, I could be wrong on that, but if that is true, since the judge at the end of the first trial said that he felt it wasn't proof beyond a reasonable doubt, why then did he not overturn it?
Some people thought you had an obligation if, as he said in the sentencing statement, based upon the evidence admitted on trial against the defendant, I am not personally convinced that he has been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, that you have an obligation to toss out the jury's guilty verdict.
That is a good point to raise with regard to what I had to say the first time. And I think if one looks at the order itself, you'll find that the words personally convinced are underlined. I think they showed italics in the opinion. And that was done with this very question in mind. And that is that if I as a judge, and you're right, the judge can't set aside a jury's verdict. That rarely occurs, but it does occur, and there is authority for that. If I as a judge believe that the jury's decision is plain wrong, it can be reversed. I did not feel that. I felt that the jury had evidence upon which they could come to the conclusion they came to. Therefore, they're not wrong. It's their conclusion. It isn't necessarily mine. It's theirs. It isn't wrong. Therefore, it isn't set aside. The point that I made in the order, tried to make in the order, was that I would not personally, and I didn't feel I could ethically sentence a person to death unless I had been convinced beyond a reasonable doubt of their guilt, and I did not feel I had been.
And you were saying that if you had served on that jury that heard that evidence, you probably would have voted not guilty in the first trial.
That's correct.
So it tells me that if it had been a bench trial in the first case, David Hendricks would not have been convicted the first time.
That's a very good question, and that is not so. And the reason I would say that is, and this does not speak well of me and my responsibilities, but as I indicated earlier, the function of a judge in a jury trial is to listen to the evidence to determine whether it is sufficient to reach the jury for its consideration. And when you're viewing the evidence from that perspective, that's different than the perspective that you view it from if you are deciding the facts themselves.
You personally believe, and you already told us that if you had been serving on that jury in the first case, you would have voted not guilty.
On the first ballot.
On the first ballot. But if you were, it was a bench trial, and you were the sole judge in the case, so to speak, you might have convicted him.
Well, yeah, but if I were in a bench case, had I been handling that case as a bench case, as I listen to witnesses, I do different things than I did in this particular case. That is, I rate the quality of the witness's testimony, and I determine as I go along whether I believe them, whether I don't believe them, where they stand on a relative credibility stage. I did not do that.
Don't you do that as a juror, too?
I was not.
So that was an interesting program. And then about 7 years ago, I presented a program very much like this in the old library. And who do you suppose was there but Judge Boehner? And of course I had to interview him a little bit. Let's see if I can play that part of it.
This was the highest profile case that you probably handled as a judge. Do you find yourself thinking about it much these days?
I think about it occasionally, not a lot. It's a long time ago at this point. And many things have happened since then.
We just heard your explanation about your reasonable doubt statement. But what sometimes is lost is in that same statement, you said you personally believe that Hendricks, and this is a quote, probably did commit these offenses. Today, David Hendricks is a free man. So my question to you is, in retrospect, do you think Lady Justice served us well?
To answer that question, I think I have to say something about these two juries. The folks from Rockford who tried the Rockford case, and the folks from Decatur who tried the second case here at Bloomington, as far as I'm concerned, deserve our thanks and our praise for what they did. Both of them, as far as I'm concerned, were correct. The first jury had enough evidence to decide the way they decided, as the court you played indicated. And the second jury, because the Supreme Court had stricken some considerable amount of the evidence of the first trial.
Involving the novels and involving the religious aspects.
basically what the state would have called motive evidence. Once you lose the motive evidence in that grotesque of a case, where a father's involved with his family, when the motive disappears, it's hard for the state to carry that case, and they failed to do that in the second trial. But both of those juries were serious about their duties. They gave up considerable time to each of those cases. And sometimes we forget the sacrifice that people make to serve justice. So I think justice has been served in the case. I might not agree with the way it ended, but yet that's the way justice is supposed to work.
Oh, I understand. Anything else you want to say to this group tonight?
No.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, today, David Hendricks is a free man. Today, in fact, is his 71st birthday, living in Orlando, Florida. And he's in the 23rd year of what appears to be a happy marriage. Gazelle is his 4th wife and 25 years younger than him. This is their wedding photo. They have 2 children, a son, Philippe Benjamin, age 9, and a daughter, Iris, who's 7. This was taken last Christmas. Incidentally, Gazelle, who's Filipino, picked up on a Philippine tradition giving her the right to name her younger sister's daughter. She chose the name Rebecca Grace as her niece's name. And yes, Gazelle has read Reasonable Doubt. And speaking of books, Hendricks wrote one, a pretty good one, about his Menard prison cellmate. He tells me he's currently at work on a second book offering financial advice, really intended for his children, thinking he won't be around and they really need financial advice. He appears to have been a financial success several times over, inventing several different back braces and selling them, had a couple of businesses, and he's also been doing some house flipping over the years in the Orlando area. And so that's partly what his book's going to be about. And he tells me he is seriously considering writing a memoir. And that, of course, would be quite a story. Now, before we get to questions and comments, I'd like to take you on a quick tour of the Hendricks case landmarks here in Bloomington, Normal. Here's the Hendricks home where the murders occurred at 313 Carl Drive in the Washington East subdivision, east of Hershey Road, as it appeared not long after the murders. The Hendricks family had lived in Stanford, moving there from Galesburg, where he established his business here. They bought this house about 16 months before the murders occurred, and this is a recent picture, so it really doesn't look much different today. It's very nicely maintained. The current owner has had it for about 5 years, paid roughly $179,000 for it. The property has had about 7 different owners over the last 4 decades. One of the more interesting facts is that one of Hendricks' models and her husband and their family purchased the home in 1992, and their family lived there for at least a good 10 years, and maybe longer. This is the house on West Kelsey Street, west of Illinois Wesleyan, that served as a meeting place for the local Plymouth Brethren. It contains a couple of apartments now. Back then, about a dozen families met for services every Sunday morning, every Sunday evening, and every Wednesday evening. This is a recent photo of a small building that served as the original office for Hendricks Orthotics business. It's in the 200 block of South Evans, not too far from here in Bloomington. It was a neighborhood grocery for lots of years before Hendricks bought it. It was a sign maker's shop a few years ago. Looks like someone's living in it now.
A sign maker. And that's who lives there now.
Okay. In about 1980, Hendricks expanded his patient care business and had several employees. It was located here in in the small strip mall at the southeast corner of Veterans in Washington, where Jimmy John's is located. And this is where the Chuck E. Cheese's restaurant was located back then, where Hendricks took the kids to eat, play the night that he left on a business trip. This is in the Landmark Mall on East College in Rummel. The strip mall contains a corner store. That restaurant opened about 8 months before the murders occurred, and it closed in 1989. The pizza the kids ate at this location was a pivotal element in both trials. The Freedom Oil Station, about a mile south of the restaurant where Hendricks went to gas up his car while the kids played on Tuan Avenue, still there. Looks a lot different today. And here again is the Hendricks gravesite in the east portion of Evergreen Memorial. The viburnum plant there, I think, is a relatively new addition to the site. It's still rather startling to see a tombstone that marks the graves of 4 people and see that they all died on the same day. Family put November 8th as the date, confirming in their own minds that the murders occurred after Hendricks left on his business trip around midnight. Investigators at the time would argue the proper date is November 7th. Now, 2 more points before we go to Q&A. For those of you who are really into this case, and you haven't been to my website, you should go there. There's a wealth of information available there at stevevogelauthor.com. Stuff that will really deepen your knowledge, a lot of primary source stuff. For instance, audio from that in-prison news conference that you saw a picture of. Notes taken by the first detective who questioned Hendricks. Letters that Hendricks has written to me over the years. That radio interview I did with Judge Boehner a week after the trial, second trial. It's all there. Lots of primary source material that you can dig into. And I also will repeat the plug. As Candace mentioned, I have a new book coming out a month from now. It's kind of a memoir, broadcast live, 71 true stories, including some I'll just as soon forget. And 3 of the 71 stories are kind of related to the Hendricks case. So you'll find those interesting as well. At every presentation like this I've made over the years, I'm always interested to find out that there are people who have a fairly direct connection to the story in the audience. And I know that to be true tonight, specifically because someone that I have never really talked to about this case man to man is here this evening. And that's the man who was the deputy coroner at the scene that night. And of course, he's now the mayor of the city of Bloomington. Dan Grady, will you come on up here and I can talk to you? Extended the invitation to Dan to come just this afternoon. I thought about Dan. Maybe he would be willing to come and say a few words about this. Dan's long public service career began as a deputy coroner of McLean County under Bill Anderson, who was an elected official at the time. But you were the person who was called to the scene that night. And well, first of all, tell us your most striking thoughts, memories of that night.
Well, my most striking memory of that night was probably the fact that when I came down the street to the house, I noticed that there weren't a bunch of marked SWAT cars. And what struck me was there was a couple cars I could identify maybe as unmarked detective cars. And that really was it. I thought, well, that's odd. Maybe the dispatcher got this wrong. This cannot be a homicide of what they said. In any event, when I then arrived at the back, Mike Hibbins, was the Bloomington patrolman who first responded, and can't think of the detective, but Denny came later. Then he came, well, I shouldn't say it a little bit later, he was in the house, I think, at the back end. But Mark Bagnell was the other detective. In any event, and we just visited for just a little bit, and then we went into the house so I could make the official pronouncement of the time of death and things along those lines. And as we went up the stairs, I can remember the flashlights shining as we went up and just illuminating just footprints that used, when I say footprints, you could tell carpet that the officers had walked up before me is what I'm getting at. And so that certainly is something to stay with me all these years. And the other that stayed with me, of course, obviously, was Susan in her bedroom and the kids down at the end of the hall. And so one of the things when we went back out and we began doing what we had to do, shortly after that, David arrives. And myself and Denny O'Brien went to tell him. And I can remember him coming up and he was saying, what's wrong, something's wrong, I know something's wrong. And I'm thinking, how's he know that? But anyway, and then when we stepped forward, we introduced ourselves and said that his family was dead. And he just looked and said, all of them? And I said, yes. And he said, even little Benji? And I said, yes. And little Benji got it the worst. He tried to either awoke or he tried to fight back. And I thought, you've just been told your entire family's dead. That's the only thing you asked me? And the detective? And then my other job after that was I took the stomach contents after autopsy across the country to all the experts. And at that time, you had to think, forensics were just coming into the field of things. And from the scene to my travels with the stomach contents, which after the first trial, where he was convicted, played a vital role, because what I believe that that David forgot was that the body still tells a story after death. And the kids were telling a story. And their story was our digestive systems had stopped. And you had said that you weren't with them and they were alive when you left. According to the experts, at least our expert sides, that was impossible. And what did we find? We found parts of a vegetarian-style pizza from Chuck E. Cheese. And we put all that back together. And the other thing I always had trouble with was how someone comes into 313 Carl Drive, doesn't break into a house, finds a 36-inch long-handled axe in the garage, takes the butcher knife from where in the kitchen it was located, goes up to the bedroom, kills 4 people, leaves the axe and the butcher knife at the end of the bed, stages a burglary, nothing taken, but stages the dresser drawers are pulled out to look like, people were filing through things. And that was done after the fact because there's no blood in the drawers. Which had been done, the fact of there was something going on during that, and they were really looking for something. Blood was all over the walls, it would have been in the drawers, if they really came there for that purpose. So those and many other things on my side of the story, Steve, is I have no reasonable doubt in my mind that David Hendricks committed those murders.
Is there anything about the case that you know that the jury didn't learn or the police didn't learn as the years went by that you think is important for people to know at this point?
I think there was a neighbor that, I don't know if the statement was missed, I don't know, but he claims, and I think he was at one of your forums at the museum and stated that I never got asked, but I was home. I could have told you David was home when he said he was gone. I saw him. I think that was missed. And in the second trial, I think the reduction of the stomach contents was reduced down, because in the first trial, after they polled the jurors, if memory serves me correctly, they said one of the main things was the stomach contents. That alibi got shattered when the bodies were saying it couldn't have been possible. If we were alive when we said we were, our bodily functions would have been working. The stomach contents and the clearness of olives and tomatoes and what have you, would, shortly after they ate their death. That doesn't fit with what he was saying.
So, you heard the question I asked the judge. Has the Lady Justice served us well? And it sounds to me like your answer is the negative.
Correct.
All right, is there anyone else that has a connection that wants to be identified here this evening? Wants to say something? You? All right. This is the lady here sitting in the front row is Mrs. Hal Jennings. Hal, of course, was the initial defense attorney for Hendricks. And Mr. Jennings, of course, died just recently. We have our sympathy. He was a good guy. And you were one of David Hendricks' models. And you met Hal while he was defending the case, is that right?
I had known him prior to the case, but he had asked me to come in and talk to him, but he didn't explain over the phone that it was in reference to a case that he was trying. So when I went in there and I just stood up and said, you know what, I can't have a conversation with you because I had already spoke to Dozier. So it would have been a real conflict for me to say, well, sure, I'll talk to you.
And your opinion on Hendricks' guilt or innocence is what?
I think that timeline kind of tells a big story for me.
Meaning guilt.
Yes.
All right. So there's a connection. At a previous session, we had a juror present. She was interesting to talk with. The jailer, we had Gary Plentz, who ran the McLean County Jail when Hendricks was held there for a year or so. Anybody else here want to be identified or speak related to the case? If not, Candace will be ready to take any and all questions and comments. We're going to wrap this up before 8:30, so here we go.
I have a question over here.
Wait. So people online can hear.
Oh, hello everyone. My name is Timmy Daniel. It's a local case I've been studying extensively for quite some time now. And my question is, why did Susan's sister's husband get they found him not guilty, even though her sister's husband said he was guilty. Susan's sister's husband said that her husband was guilty of killing the family. Why did he get let off so easily off him passing a polygraph test that wasn't accurate at the time, with it being the 90s, 80s? I feel like that's so weird because the polygraphs weren't accurate at the time. They're not even accurate now. Why would they be accurate at the time and him being acquitted from the trial? How does that make sense?
You're talking about Martha Lewis, Susan's sister, who was married to John Lewis.
Yeah.
John Lewis took a lie detector test voluntarily not long after the murders occurred. And the police pretty much set him aside as a suspect at that point. But after the two of them divorced, Martha came out rather strongly. In fact, she tried to generate a lot of media attention and accused her husband of committing the crimes. This is the same man to whom, when Hendricks was in prison, David's brother went out to California to track him down and try to interview him. And he claimed that Lewis admitted to the crime. And then when he went back to retrieve a tape recorder to get it on tape, then he pretended like he hadn't said that. Hendricks tried to get that little bit of information in the second trial, but was unsuccessful in doing that. But one of the more interesting things to me related to that is that after the reasonable doubt was revised in 2018, a lady came forward to me, and honestly, my memory is a little bit dry on this, so I'm not sure I got it exactly right. But she had information that indicated that the couple that was staying with John and Martha Lewis, coincidentally, right along the railroad tracks next to the cemetery, almost in sight of the Hendricks graves, she claimed that the man and that couple, a young couple that was staying with them temporarily, came home with some bloodied surgical scrubs. And her story was pretty credible. I did some research, found out that the man, in fact, was known to police. He had a record here. And I tracked him down to an Arizona location, and then it ran dry. So I gave David the information. And he spent a few bucks on a private investigator to do some work on it. And he found out, and now we're talking about 2018 or 2019, he found out that that man had died 20 years earlier. So 27 years ago, that man left us. And I think he is definitely a person of interest. The story was pretty credible as I recall it. And the woman was, I don't recall her relationship to him, but she seemed to know a lot about him. And was very, very upset about it. Okay, a further question? Right here?
A couple of quick things. I read your book at least 3 times over the years, and each time I got a different opinion. Guilty, not guilty, guilty. And with that, 2 questions. 1, what do you think? And 2, was there any or ever any emotion shown by him? Real emotion? Or was it dry eye emotion?
I'll take the second part of that first. There was emotion. Not in the way that police thought he should react initially, but I'm not sure what the rule book is in terms of how you're supposed to react when you find out that your family's been wiped out. But there was emotion at different times, different places, and the like. Of course, you saw the gravesite photo, you know, at the Evergreen Cemetery at the funeral. But he will tell you that there were plenty of times when he was emotional wreck over this type of thing, but perhaps not in the way that many people would expect him to. But at the time, he had a strong religious belief, and he held on to that. And of course, I kind of got him in trouble a little bit when he talked about maybe they're in a better place now and that type of thing. And I'll get to the first question in just a moment. But among the very interesting things on that website is a rather lengthy entry where is discussed the fact that on the tombstone, there's a blank spot where there was going to be a Bible verse that was going to be put in there. And that became a subject of some controversy because he believed whatever he put in there would be misinterpreted somehow. And there was an exchange of letters with me, and then he wrote a poem about it, and then he wrote a letter to the Pentagraph about it, and told about what he was going to put on there and why he didn't. Anyway, that's all on the website. Pretty interesting to see. Now, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I think he probably did not do it. I'm only about 90% sure. I have no way of knowing that. But I think it is probably not the murder of his children. I say that for a number of reasons, and kind of ascending importance. First of all, there was no physical evidence against him. Now, there was no physical evidence against anybody else either. It was what detectives said was, experts said was the cleanest bloody crime scene they'd ever seen. And it's interesting to speculate about how different it would be today in terms of investigation if the crime occurred today and the technology that's available, forensic technology, but even just video surveillance. I mean, these days, if something happens on your street, someone has a picture of it. And so the evidence would be a whole lot better. But there was no physical evidence against David Hendricks. Secondly, I don't get the motive. The motive makes no sense to me. The motive that you had to kill your family to get out of the marriage. And I don't know what other motive there would be. That's the best that they can come up with. Third, so far as we know, he's never had any, I'll call them psychotic episodes. Certainly didn't during prison, hasn't since, as far as we know. He's got a young family, everything seems to be great, fine. So it's not like he probably snapped and did something that he doesn't know he did, or had a bad night, you know. It doesn't make sense. This is very subjective. I have spent quite a bit of time with him on several occasions. And I just don't think he seems capable, likely to have done it. If he were your next door neighbor, I think you would like him. He has a good sense of humor. He's very bright. He's a very good writer. And it just doesn't seem, I mean, he loved his family and everything I tell. And it just doesn't make sense that he would do it. But the most telling reason for me is that both of his dead wife's parents stood by him every minute. Both of his parents stood by him every minute. And his six brothers and sisters all stand by him. And her 6 brothers and sisters all stand by him. Can't believe that he would have done it to his family as they knew him with his family and so on. So, again, I could be wrong. I don't know that we'll ever finally perfectly know the truth unless someone has a deathbed confession. But that's where I stand on it after thinking about it a lot over the years and talking to him quite a bit about it several times over the years. Next question.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is, I gather that my understanding that the difference in the verdict with the 2 cases, the 2 trials, is because it took away the information that led to a motive in the second one. And I'm wondering...
Involving the models and religion.
Yeah, the models and religion. And that was the judge's decision, is that correct?
Well, no, that was the state Supreme Court. It said you can't include that.
Okay. What do you think about leaving that motive out, and why did they do that? So that's my first question.
I'm not a judge and I'm not a lawyer, so I really can't explain that.
So they never said why or anything?
No, they did.
Oh.
And you can find the Supreme Court decision on the website. But I honestly can't repeat. I don't understand. One time I understood it, I can't summarize it for you tonight.
Okay.
Sorry.
And the other is just whether there's any, how it's affected your life to be so involved with this case. I don't know if you have any comments about that.
Well, it's a major story of my journalism career. My graduate degree is in print journalism. There I was working for a radio station. And as many of you will remember, Hendricks got arrested in December of that year. And then he didn't go on trial for a full 11 months. And both sides were very close-mouthed about it. There was hardly anything in the media about what the cops knew, or what the motive was, or what defense did Hendricks have. Neither side was saying anything of consequence at all. And it's when I got probably, well, the jury selection took at least a week, I think. And then when we got a few days into the trial, I realized this was a heck of a story. And that's when I said to myself, well, if you're ever going to write a book, you don't write this one, you never write a story, because it kind of fell in my lap. So I began taking more copious notes, and wound up with the book. Yes, sir.
Are you still in contact with him, and can we poll the audience, guilty or innocent?
Am I in contact with Hendricks? Yes. I emailed him to let him know that this was being live streamed. In fact, David, if you're watching, you've got my phone number. You can call in right now if you want to. Yeah, in fact, I asked him specifically whether he knew a couple of questions. I was wanting to go up to David. And I wanted to know whether Susan's parents were still alive, Chuck and Anita Palmer. And he told me that Chuck Palmer died about a year ago, but Anita is still alive, and I think still is at Oakdale at this point. She must be in her 90s by now. And I asked him whether John Lewis was still alive, and he says, as far as I know, he is. I haven't heard differently. And I said, what about Martha? And he said that he talked recently to Seth Palmer, Susan's brother, who basically said that she's kind of persona non grata in the family. They kind of think she's not with it, and kind of disowned her, I think. But that's what Hendricks told me, and that was in an email conversation just the last couple of days. Now, we will do a poll, but we're going to wait a little while because people's minds may be changed. Other questions or comments?
Not that I want to sway your opinion or anything, but given that I'm thinking of two recent cases, the Chris Watts and the Scott Peterson, one in Colorado, one in California, where they annihilated their families and pregnant wives. It does happen, and there were no signs, no evidence. Chris Watts confessed, I guess.
Fair point.
And there was Scott Peterson, they found a couple of things.
Fair point.
Would that sway your opinion at all, knowing that, now, I know some of the details are a little different, as far as I know, they weren't, religious people or anything, but anyway,
No,
just a thought there.
Yeah, it is, and I've never lost sight of the idea that it happens. No question about that.
My question is, he's had two ex-wives between Susan and the one he's married to now. Has anyone talked to them and gotten their opinion, their feelings?
The question is, have I talked to them or?
Well, has anybody
Oh.
want to speak on those
Yes,
ex-wives?
okay. He's been married 4 times. He's now in, I say, marriage 25 years to the last. Okay, so Susan obviously married for about 11 years. Then there was the woman that he married while he was in prison. And she became his chief advocate in the media. It was a strange thing. They got married just a couple days before the state Supreme Court was set to hand down its original decision. They got married in prison, and a couple days later, the Supreme Court upheld the verdict. He was going to be behind bars the rest of their lives. But Pat was a divorced woman who had taken up with him via letter. She was working with some church ministry or something. Anyway, they connected and developed a relationship. There was nothing like conjugal visits or anything like that in Menard. But they got married, and she was an advocate for him right up through the trial, the second trial. And then about a year or a year and a half after that, he got divorced after he was free. They lived in Ohio. And then not long after that, David basically said he was having a midlife crisis. I think he owned a Corvette and maybe an airplane by then too. He was back in business. And he met a young woman who was beautiful, he said. And they were married after a short courtship, and they were married for only about less than a year, about 11 months, I think. And he said they just never connected. So that was marriage number 3. Marriage number 4 was kind of an internet thing. He had met a lot of Filipinos in some tennis group he was playing in Orlando, and he found out that there was a website for Filipino women who were looking to meet European or American men. And he had carried on conversations on the internet with a half dozen of them, and then identified some that he would like to meet in person. So he and his brother went to Manila, and Gazelle was the second young lady that he met there. And at that point, he decided he didn't need to see the remaining 3. A year-long courtship, so to speak, involved getting a proper immigration papers and all that. They were married in Orlando, and they have a habit of going to the Philippines every couple of years, and last I knew, her mother came to visit them for a number of weeks each year. He had a vasectomy, tried to get it reversed. Bottom line is, the 2 children they have are in vitro, and 2 young children who are great kids, I guess. Yeah, that's what I have.
In the book, you talk about prosecutor Ron Dozier having his own doubts about the guilt of David Hendricks. And then, I'm sorry, I don't have the chapter number, but you end one of the chapters saying that Dozier no longer had any doubts. He knew Hendricks was guilty. And it's not clear to me, was there something specific that had happened in that chapter, or was it just a variety of things that led him to that conclusion?
The honest answer is I don't remember or I don't know. One of the remarkable things about this case was supposed to be the eve of the trial, he and Hendricks had a face-to-face conversation. And there was a tape recording of it, which disappeared. And I reconstructed it in the book based upon my interviewing both Hendricks and Dozier. And Dozier left that meeting thinking he had the wrong guy. He was convinced at that point that Hendricks was not guilty. Some of you may know Alan Sunder. He was my assistant news director at WJBC back then. And he told me just not long ago about actually having been in Dozier's office shortly after that conversation occurred. And Dozier was really kind of beside himself because they, of course, were all prepped for a trial that was literally going to start, I think, the next day or whatever. Turned out that the trial didn't start the next day because they forgot something happened in Rockford that didn't allow the trial to go forward. Some kind of stupid, and they had to delay it a little bit. But eventually Dozier came around, and my memory tells me it was after Hendricks testified in the trial. It was at that point where he was pretty sure that they had the right guy. But I'm not totally sure about that type of A long time ago. Where are we?
Steve, you speak into the
Okay.
microphone. Perfect, thank you.
Steve, I've only progressed to the part of the trial where they're debating the reliability of the stomach contents of the victims.
So that's a long part of the book.
Yeah. So, in all these years since, is the expert opinion about the reliability of stomach contents to time of death, has that changed any?
That's a real good question, and I don't have the answer to that. Mr. Mayor, do you have any insights on that? Whether there's any thought about the reliability of stomach contents as estimated time of death? Has that changed and improved?
Well, as I said earlier, forensics were just coming on board, but there's one thing of the experts that I sought out throughout the country, and that was they believed in the stomach contents, that there was no way around that the alibi did not fit with what the bodies were saying. And as far as the stomach contents goes, at that time, preserving those, I can remember this vividly in Miami with the Dade County Medical Examiner saying, this is your case. Preserve these. How are you going to preserve these? And he gave us ways to do that. So it was very much believed as things developed, there's one thing that David didn't think of, and that's what the kids could say after death.
But it's also true, the defense had very credible witnesses who said you cannot rely on those stomach contents to estimate time of death.
That's what trials are all about, hired guns.
There's a question back here.
I just had a question about why we appealed, because an appeal can't be done just because I don't believe I'm not guilty. So what was the appeal process? Why did it go for appeal? Because I feel like that could have some weight.
Well, the defendant, person who's been convicted, has a right of appeal to the state appellate court. And I think they have to take the case and have to decide it, and they did, 3-0, upholding the verdict. The state Supreme Court did not have to take the case, but it did. One of the 7 justices recused himself because there was some family connection to one of the defense attorneys. So there were only 6 justices who sat on that decision, which took, what did I say, 22 months, I think, to come to a decision on a 4-2 vote. And then about a year later, they reopened the case. There was only one judge that was different. One had retired and someone had replaced him. And so there were still 6 justices, and that was unanimous 6-0 vote to overturn the verdict and order a new trial or set him free. A question I frequently get, sometimes think about a lot, worry about actually, is whether the book had anything to do with the Supreme Court decision to overturn. The timing is interesting because it all happened about the same time. The book came out, and then not long after that, they decided to rehear it. And I've asked that question to people who think they know, and I get 2 different answers. Yes and no. So that's what I'm going to leave that. I prefer to think it didn't have anything to do with it.
I'm going to refer back to when you were talking about the family and his family, how they all supported him all along the way. And I'm wondering if they were aware of his activities while he was out selling his back brace, and if they would have been so supportive of him, or it going against everything that they believed in as far as adultery goes, and he would have been kicked out of the group. And would they, I mean, could you even conceive that for your own person that you love so dearly, and put on this beautiful, I think, an act that everything was so fabulous with his family?
Yeah, I know that it was shocking to his family members when this darker side came out during the trial. His father to me, was noticeably absent at much of the trial. His mother was there all the time. She was going to testify for us, so she couldn't be in the courtroom. For all these weeks, she sat outside, you know, having people like me tell her what's going on inside. And all of his, by the way, one of his sisters was at this group 7 years ago. She was in the crowd 7 years ago when we did this thing when Judge Boehner was here. But yeah, I think they probably were surprised, but they also said, yeah, he's not perfect. Which one of us is? I think his father probably said that at some point. But there's no way that they think he killed his family.
So I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but it goes back to motive. David is sly and cunning and charming from what I can understand of him. So what is the motive? Some stranger just picked that house and came in and slaughtered that family with nothing else going on in the community, where David was kind of going down a different path. He was religious, so he had to do it in a way that no one would believe that a husband and a father could do it for personal greed and gain or whatever. Do you kind of understand what I'm saying? That's the part I can't get past.
Yeah, I understand that. The motive, if Hendricks didn't do it, and if one of the two people that I suspect may have had some role in it were involved in it, I think the motive would have been mostly jealousy. David Hendricks, in his second Supreme Court filing, directly accused John Lewis of committing a crime. John Lewis was kind of an outsider of the family. He was kind of a lone wolf, and never was very jealous of David's success. Whether that brings you to commit a crime, I don't know. But and then the guy that was staying with him was kind of a nerdy well and had a record. Could have been drugs involved. We know that John Lewis had access to the house, he knew where the key was, and things like that.
So he did it to hurt David. He did the crime possibly to hurt David.
Yeah, that's possible. But I can't. I mean, it's also possible that it was just random. It doesn't say likely, but it's possible. It's random, totally like that. That happens too, you know.
Well, I was going to ask you if David Hendricks didn't do it, who did? But you just spent the last 2 minutes answering the question better than I could ask it. So, thank you.
Is the case closed?
Technically, no. Practically, yes. If the police department basically says it's an inactive case. The evidence is still across the street in the evidence locker, as far as I know. If somebody came forward and had good evidence, I'm sure they would pursue it. But the fact is, there's no one in the police department, as far as I know now, who's worked there or that the case was first investigated. And the police people who did investigate it, who are still with us, they believe they got their man.
Hello. In our country, where you are innocent until proven guilty, and you said that most of the evidence is circumstantial, I'm just curious, did you interview any of the jurors, and what was the final decision that kind of pushed them towards the guilty verdict in the first trial?
I wish I could remember that. I did interview, I think, 7 of the first 12 jurors. And as the judge indicated in that interview, they took it very seriously, their job, obviously. And I think the expert witnesses had a lot to do with the decision in the first case. I think they kind of lined up with the mayor in terms of believing the prosecution experts saying, yeah, these murders occurred before midnight, before Hendricks left the house. Clearly, if the murders occurred at 10 o'clock, it's pretty clear who did it. But if it occurred at 1 a.m., probably not. But I honestly don't, I think there's something in the book about that, but I honestly haven't read that book recently. I want to, for those of you who've read the book recently, I just want to kind of apologize almost. Because you know there's so much detail in there about the trials themselves, particularly the first trial. And if I were to rewrite the book or put out a new edition these days, I would greatly compact that, would summarize that. But I was very interested, because this trial was held in Rockford, and it was so controversial at the time, and there was so much interest in the case, I was very interested in trying to present an objective description of what happened in the trial, and let you, the reader, weigh the facts as best as I could. Now, there are facts in that book that are never made it to the jury, of course, so it's not apples and apples. But that's why the book is so long in going to the trial. And if you're reading it for a second time, just skip over some of that stuff. Okay.
Well, I love the book. I've read it 4 times.
Can anybody top that?
And I was a young mother at the time when this happened. I was 22, I had a baby. And, you know, everybody's saying he's guilty for how he was acting and the stomach contents. And having a baby, I know I changed lots of diapers. And I seen things pass, and I always felt that was kind of junk science then, and now the more I have learned about the stomach contents, how activity, how every individual body digests. So to me, that was junk science. And did I think maybe he was involved? Maybe, but they didn't have enough evidence. If I was on the jury, I couldn't have found him guilty. And the way he reacted, and like they said, well, you know, you don't know how you would react. And with the religious point of view, you know, I mean, he was so religious, and they're always told, you know, they're going to be in a better place. Yeah. And so, I hate to say it, but I really don't think he did it by what the evidence that was presented to him, to the court. So I'm kind of with you.
We're friends, we disagree.
We're in a book club together. We read the book as a book club just a couple of months ago, so.
Thank you.
And we truly enjoyed it. That's kind of how I feel about it, so I don't know if that changes anybody's feeling.
I hope you read the 2018 edition.
Yes.
For those of you who haven't read the 2018 edition of the book, actually all I did was add a couple thousand words and a few pictures to it. But the library has several copies. Get a hold of it and read the last chapter, because it just has some very intriguing stuff in it that are like coincidences and like it's kind of entertaining stuff, actually.
Steve, I have this little vapor going right behind my eyes that I've got to give some air to. And this goes to the issue of motive. And the prosecutors evidently very heavily reliance on the religious conviction of this man. And in Christianity, and in my view, probably the more Christian quote, one thing that plays very heavily in the Christian religion is the shedding of blood and sacrifice and redemption through the shedding of blood. And my question is, when you examine the prosecution's attack on this aspect of his life, do you have any recollection that something of that nature might have come up?
I don't think so. I don't recall anything like that. I did write down the two epitaphs that Hendricks considered putting on the tombstone. And they have a little bit of a connection to what you're talking about. This is what he was thinking about putting on there and then decided not to because he thought they would be open to misinterpretation. One is with Christ, which is far better. And the other one is, of whom the world was not worthy. Both of those kind of speak to the idea that there's a reason that they were taken away from here.
Thank you. I just have, I guess, kind of two questions that kind of tie together. And it's just that when they removed what they were calling the motive with the religion and then what was going on with his job, before the second one, I guess one thing about that is that, this person on trial, that kind of who he was his family, his religion, and his very successful job. So it just seemed odd that they took 2/3 of that away and then the family was gone. And I guess my question is leading to, like you said, there's stuff sitting over there today. If somebody would take it up, do you think with today's technology, if somebody was interested, they might be able to find out other things, or is that not?
That's a good question. Of course, there'd have to be reason to do it. You'd have to believe that.
They haven't found anybody yet, so that seems like a good enough reason.
Except that the history of the department is that they did find the culprit and justice let him get away. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting speculation about whether there's any technology now that would turn up new evidence based upon the physical evidence that's sat there now for decades, of course. Okay, let's take two more questions.
Steve, I read your first book and was totally convinced that David Hendricks did it. Then after reading your second edition, I was totally convinced John Lewis did it. And basically, because he had a key to the house, he knew where the axe was, because you said he had chopped up, he borrowed the axe to chop wood. He was extremely angry because his wife was not invited to the baby shower that Susan went to.
That's right.
He was jealous of David's success in the money that he had. He worked in the hospital, I guess, and had access to scrubs.
Worked at Brokaw, yeah.
And told his wife to wash the scrubs, but the doctor they had gotten them from actually hadn't been at that hospital for 4 months after that. And then Jim Hendricks goes out to California and interviews him, and the guy actually admits that he chopped up his family. Now, to me, that's more evidence than David Hendricks ever had, or, and I'm surprised the Bloomington Police Department would not go after him or, look into it. It just seems so obvious.
Fair comments, and everything you described there was accurate. John Lewis, I was stationed outside the Hendricks home the morning after the murders was being discovered, and so it's like 6 o'clock in the morning, and the person I later found out was John Lewis. Came up to me. I was in a radio station car, and he had told me that he had seen the photo of the house on the front page of the Pantograph. He had been at work at Brokaw, and he had seen the Pantograph, and they had a photo, very short story, at Deadline, on the front page of the Pantograph. back when the Pentagram was put in your town, and then here that anyway. But he had seen the house, recognized it, and came over and said he wanted to see what was going on. That's about all he said, as I recall. Okay, one more question.
Lost the hand that was over here that I pointed to. Okay, one more question. Eric.
Hi, thank you. So I went to school with Becky and Grace and Benji. I was in 6th grade at the time, and I definitely remember that morning. I remember it vividly. And of course, at my age, at 11, you know, stuff is kept from me. Growing up over the years and reading what I do know about the case and the gruesomeness of the murders, I guess as far as motive is concerned, if he's only trying to relieve himself with his duties with his family, what is the psychosis and the psychology behind somebody who murders their children and their wife that way if it was just based on not wanting to be married anymore?
I don't really have a comment on that except to say I think you're on. It just makes sense to me in many ways. Okay, I haven't forgotten about the poll. Now you're going to have 3 choices. We'll do it by show of hands. Hendricks is not guilty, will be the first choice. Hendricks is guilty, second choice. Third choice is, I don't know. Okay? Let's see the hands of people who believe David Hendricks killed his family. Okay.
Guilty.
This is guilty. Yeah.
Guilty first. Guilty first.
Okay, so roughly half of the audience here, okay, hands up. How many believe he is innocent of the crime? Only a few. And how many don't know? Not certain. Okay, so my unofficial tally is, I would say 60% said guilty, 40% said don't know. There's a few in there that said innocent. So there you go. So it remains a mystery. We probably never will know the whole story. If we do, it'll be a big story. I thank you for being here tonight. I encourage you to read this book. I promise that there's no part as boring as the middle part of Reasonable Doubt. It's going to be published a month from now. Thank you.
We hope that you will come back November 4th when we have our History Reads Book Club, which will be discussing the final book of the year, Burning of the World, The Great Chicago Fire, and the War for a City's Soul, and the True Crime Book Club on December 15th, The League of Lady Poisoners, Illustrated True Stories of Dangerous Women. You can find everything about those book clubs on the library's website and the museum's website. Thank you once again.